input distribution systems, which is part of the Agro's PID capacity building and Agro's learning agenda. We continue to make Agro a learning institution by ensuring continued learning from our partners and our colleagues on what we do, how we do it, and the effect this has on the smallholder farmers. Today's presentation is by our PID input distribution system colleagues and their partners from various parts of Africa. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and the recording will be shared after the meeting. Also remember to type in your questions at any time in the questions window provided on the right-hand side of the screen. Join me now in welcoming Dr. Victor Antwi, Head of Input Distribution Systems, PID, who will be the moderator for this session today. Over to you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Josephine, and you are all welcome. My name is Victor Antwi, Head of Input Distribution and Agro Dealer Development Unit at Agro, the moderator for today's webinar. The President and staff of Agro, members and other members of PIATA, including Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, DFID, BMZ, and USAID, CEOs and managing directors of agribusinesses, government and public officials in food and agriculture, captains of industries and cherished agri partners, financial institutions and business advisory service providers, investors in agribusiness and allied sectors, leaders of farmer-based organizations, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on which part of the globe you are located at this point. You are all welcome to this webinar titled Role of Agro Input Distribution Systems in African Agriculture Transformation Agenda. Africa's agriculture transformation is key to ensure food security and the end of hunger and malnutrition on the continent. Africa's economy depends on agriculture as it employs over 50% of its people, and it is a key contributor to the continent's GDP. This notwithstanding, Africa has not been able to realize the full potential of its arable land due to a wide spectrum of factors, including the lack of access to improved agricultural technologies, markets and finance, as well as appropriate and timely information. The lack of access to these factors has, over the years, contributed to low crop yields and consequently undermined food security on the continent. Agricultural transformation is crucial and must be resilient to withstand disasters, including the current global health crisis, COVID-19. A key strategy is the development of a robust and dynamic agro input distribution system to facilitate access to agribusiness technologies that will accelerate economic growth. Agro dealership is crucial to agro input distribution system for improved seeds, fertilizer, and other technologies that are facilitating rural-based smallholders access to cost-effective pre-production, production, and post-harvest technologies. However, the lack of access to finance, as well as weak credit transaction mechanisms between input suppliers and agro dealers due to mistrust and poor business ethics among some agro dealers, are adversely affecting investment in the subsector. Also, the diversification of less than 10% of agro dealers into mechanization systems and output market activities has made the rest vulnerable to industrial instability and catastrophes. Furthermore, the lack of digitization mechanisms is not making their transactions efficient and effective. To address some of these challenges, AGRA and other partners have been developing agro dealer networks over the last decade. In the midst of the global health crisis, border closures and lockdowns in some countries are preventing seed companies and agro dealers from resupplying imports, thus increasing costs and reducing product availability. The restrictions are also affecting the agricultural sector by limiting access to information access to input distribution channels, and how agricultural produce is marketed. This webinar seeks to address some of these issues and share information to strengthen the agro input distribution systems in Africa. It also seeks to facilitate private sector partnership with government and public institutions to enhance sustainable agribusiness development and growth for continental food security. To help me do justice to this interesting topic for today's webinar are Mr. Fred Muhuku, who is the Senior Program Officer, Input Distribution and Agro-Dealer Development Unit, Agro, who is a plenary presenter. Mr. Wilfred Tembo, who is the country rep for Ifrs in Uganda. Madam Maimuna Kolibali, founder and CEO of Faso Kaba Seed Company in Mali. Madam Josephine Minji, founder and CEO of Britain, Tanzania. Mr. Andrew Anyaku, head of banking sector for SLE Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Engineer Tunde Bello, Director of Farm Input Support Services, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Abuja, Nigeria. We will now have the pleasure to listen to Fred, who will make a plenary presentation, and this will be followed by responses from the discussants. There will be opportunity for responses to some of the questions. Please, I would like to encourage you to post your questions at the chat corner. Now, over to Fred.
Thank you, Victor. Good afternoon, good morning, fellow panelists. Welcome to this webinar. I'm going to make a short presentation on the role of agro input distribution systems in African agriculture. Can you see my screen?
Yes, please, go ahead, Fred.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to move to the next slide, sorry. Technology. Yeah, can you see the next slide? This is the outline of my presentation. Now, input technologies and functional systems and markets are important in driving adoption. However, there are some challenges in Africa. There are some gaps in farmer access to and adoption of these solutions. The smallholder farmers' yields in most of African countries remain low because farmers are still using the traditional technologies and practices. So to scale the technologies needs both public and private sector investments so as to create organized input delivery systems, mature functional market outlets, conducive policy environments, and last but not least, functional and efficient regulatory environments. So Agro and its partners are continuing to create the conditions for smallholder farmers' adoption of new inputs and practices by developing and strengthening systems and institutions that deliver technologies and impact at farm level. So the agro dealers, therefore, are regarded as the primary conduit, the primary channel through which inputs and technologies from suppliers can reach farmers in Africa, partly because most of our farmers reside in very rural areas. So agro dealers do avail inputs to smallholder farmers in the rural areas, thus enhancing access and affordability by these smallholder farmers. They increase awareness and adoption of the new technologies through a number of demand creation activities. Furthermore, agro dealers do provide primary commodity aggregation, storage, post-harvest handling, and linkage to structured markets. And in many instances, agro dealers are also providing other services on the farm and post-harvest. Now, what are the efforts that have gone into developing agro dealer networks? So far, over 30,000 agro dealers have been developed in sub-Saharan Africa by Agro working with service providers to identify entrepreneurs and change agents within the communities and assist them to grow into viable micro, small, and medium enterprises through a suite of support services, including business development services, technical training on both inputs and outputs, financial support through a number of grants, credit guarantees, and brokering supply credit, market development and awareness creation, enabling the agro dealers to promote their businesses and increase awareness among the smallholder farmers, building linkages along the whole distribution network so that the agro dealers can be able to access inputs and they can be able to reach their ultimate clientele, the farmers. And then supporting these agro dealers to obtain official certification by regulatory agencies, because in a number of countries, there are regulations that agro dealers have got to go through before they can be licensed. Now, in addition, agro dealers are also encouraged to sell a number of innovative products, surprisingly, such as solar products, energy efficient stoves, but also things like water pumps and irrigation equipment. These sort of products are very crucial in transforming rural lives, but they also provide an income stream to agro dealers. And we believe that such innovative products can also attract the youth into agro dealership. Finally, we also promote the use of digital tools for efficient business management by the agro dealers. Such tools, if well used, do enhance use of mobile money, access to market information, efficient business transactions, real-time record keeping and accounting, and generation of financial statements, and other uses. So we are looking at an ecosystem of resources that are required for effective agro dealership. We are looking at aspects of integrity, aspects of trust. We are looking at respect and respectability. We are looking at service orientation. We are looking at a business mind, and of course, financial capacity among the agro dealers. The ecosystem of a good agro dealer network, therefore, comprises of people, definitely the agro dealers and all the value chain actors, products, very, very important, improved inputs. If these products are not there, then the agro dealers have no job. And finally, least but not least, profits. If there are no profits to be made in the system, it is a no-starter. So the ecosystem of people, products, and profits really constitutes the available agro dealer resources. Now, having developed these networks, we are looking at transforming the entire system of agro dealer networks or input distribution network. Systemic change really refers to transformation in the structure of a system that leads to impact on large numbers of people in their conditions and behavior. It is also a change in underlying causes in system performance for better functionality. The key attributes we are looking at in this case for systems change are mostly scale and sustainability. So the signs and signals for change in the inputs distribution system include the rural density of agro dealers, which is a determinant of the distance traveled by smallholder farmers to access inputs. This is a measure of scale. The strength of business linkages across the network. This is a measure of sustainability. If a small agro dealer in a rural area doesn't know where to obtain inputs from, then the system is not functioning properly. If an input supplier like a seed company doesn't know how to reach the millions of smallholder farmers in rural areas, then the system is not transformed. We are looking at level of investments by the agro dealers and other value chain actors in the input distribution system. This is also a measure of sustainability, because partners like Agro and implementing partners we are working with are investing in these systems. But we would like to see the value chain actors themselves investing in the businesses. And that will show us that the system is actually sustainable in the long run. And of course, the volume of transactions by the same agro dealers and value chain actors, which is a measure of scale and sustainability of the system. So if we can achieve this, then we know that we have attained systemic transformation in the input distribution system. This is driven by key players I have already mentioned: input supply companies, hub agro dealers. Commodity off-takers are key, because we said that one of the activities of agro dealers is, of course, to aggregate produce at the end of the day from their farmers. And then, of course, the retail agro dealers. Beyond the retail agro dealers, of course, we have got other last mile delivery agents like VBAs, and then the farmers themselves. So this slide is just an example of a well-integrated input distribution network. I borrowed it from our partners in Tanzania. And on this slide, you can see we have got a number of input companies on the my left-hand side of the slide. And these input companies are linked to a hub agro dealer. This is just an example of a hub agro dealer. And the same hub agro dealer, as you move to the right of my screen, is linked to a number of rural agro dealers. These are just examples. The hub agro dealer is linked to many more than this. And he can also be linked directly to a number of VBAs, while the VBAs are also linked with the rural agro dealers. And it's these VBAs that then reach the villages. Each VBA is, let me say, attached to or serves a particular village where the smallholder farmers are found. So this is a good example of a well-integrated input distribution network and a measure of systemic transformation in the network. So finally, let's look at a few achievements just to show how far we have come. Of course, I have already pointed out that we have developed more than 30,000 agro dealers in a number of sub-Saharan countries. This is just an illustration. Looking at two or three of the outputs, for example, the quantity of fertilizer on the left-hand side, my left-hand side of the screen, we have already achieved the targets that we set and exceeded by almost 9%. And on the number of agro dealers to the right-hand side of my screen, we have also achieved the targets that we set ourselves in the last 2 or so years in the current strategic period of Agro. Again, just to show some detail there, no need to go through the whole thing, but number one there, an indicator number one is the hub of agro dealers we have supported and the progress we have made, 82%. And definitely we shall achieve our target by the end of this strategic period. And the second indicator, the number of retail agro dealers, as I pointed out earlier on, we have already exceeded the target that we set ourselves. Now, just a look again as an example at the distances traveled by farmers. Generally, these are average distances in the countries, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Nigeria, in Ghana and Burkina Faso. Our target was approximately 6 kilometers, but so far Rwanda has achieved the target way beyond to about 1.85 kilometers. Tanzania and Nigeria are still lagging behind. This is average countrywide, but we know that in particular geographies where we are operating, these distances have already been substantially reduced, both in Tanzania and in Ghana. And you can also see from this graph that those countries, the yellow bars are the actual achieved, and the blue or whatever, indigo bars are the baseline. We can see that all the countries have so far showing positive progress from the original baselines. So as a summary, a systemically transformed input distribution system, if you want, would lead to demand for improved technologies increasing among smallholder farmers. The supply of these technologies closer to farmers is growing. Use of improved technologies among smallholder farmers is increasing. There is a demand, there is use. There can be demand, but with low use. So we want to see the use of improved technologies among smallholder farmers increasing. And that means yields among smallholder farmers for particular crops that we monitor will be increasing. And that leads to increased incomes. That leads to increased food supply for smallholder farmers. That means that smallholder farmers have alternatives to survive on. That means they are resilient. Generally, the capacity of farmers is improving. We see an increase in the use and availability of IC technologies, and farmers are increasingly accessing extension services. This is what we would like to see, and we are already beginning to see once we systemically transform the agro-input distribution network in sub-Saharan countries. So finally, as a way forward, we are looking at increasing investments in digitalization, which is essential to enhance efficiency and effectiveness, and also build resilience in the input distribution network. The unit, the Agro-Dealer Development Unit, will accelerate the identification and adoption of appropriate digital tools, in line, of course, with Agra's digitalization strategy, or ICT for Ag strategy. We are looking at training and supporting more VBAs as rural agro dealers to enhance farmer access, to improve delivery at the last mile level. And we are achieving this, but we also want to continue to collaborate with the VBA network. Even if we don't expect all the VBAs to become agro dealers, but those who will remain as VBAs, we must work closely with them because they are good at building farmer demand, and we need them. We are looking at stronger linkages with input suppliers and hub agro dealers so that we can probably increase consignment supplies to retailers in the rural areas. And we are looking at stronger involvement of the hub agro dealers and even the input suppliers themselves in expanding the retail network so as to enhance sustainability of their businesses. In a nutshell, this is what we have been doing. This is what we hope to be doing in the near future so as to create sustainable input distribution network serving smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Fred, for that elaborate presentation. Now we're going to our discussants, and I'd like to start with Josephine. Josephine is the founder and CEO of Britain. Britain is a partner in Tanzania, and they have been supporting a lot of development of agro dealers in Tanzania. So, Josephine, what is your perspective on the current input distribution systems in Tanzania, and how has the global health crisis impacted on it? And if you could also tell us what are some of the gaps and issues that are stifling the development and growth of agro input distribution systems, and how could these challenges be resolved?
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Antwi. Thank you, Fred, for the presentation. I'm trusting you can hear me. Basically,
yes,
Tanzania, you can hear me. Thank you.
Yeah.
In Tanzania, let's just talk about, as you saw what Fred had put in as his slide, showing the distribution network of agro dealers, and we've seen that in some areas that the agro dealer network is quite advanced, where we have the hub agro dealers, the input suppliers, and the rural agro dealers actually developing, working together, and actually sustainably doing business and making profits and making money, and farmers accessing inputs. So the input distribution system is actually quite developed in Tanzania. Agro has worked over the last 9 years on agro dealer development and has been able to assess how far we have gone. And this is in the Southern Highlands mainly, where there's big development. But when we look at the COVID situation, the biggest issue, first and foremost, in Tanzania, you realize that the biggest inputs go to maize and cereals. Those are the biggest consumers of inputs. And basically the season for inputs is November, heading up to March, which takes up the 2 seasons, the beginning of each of the 2 seasons of rain-fed agriculture in Tanzania for cereals. But you also find that we have vegetables, and we do a lot of vegetables, and a lot of our vegetables are actually exported. So from the agro dealers directly discussing with them and finding out what they're doing and how the COVID situation is affecting them, they've said there's, in the last 2 months since we actually reported the global crisis in Tanzania, we realized that business has slowed down a little bit. Farmers are of vegetables, farmers have reduced their input use. They've reduced the acres that they're planting for vegetables because of export. And I think also because a lot of people also went into self-quarantine. So there's been a bit of a slowdown in business. In terms of gaps that I see in the input value chain, one of them was highlighted by Fred, and just to highlight it a bit better, was access to finance. Because the system is the system is so expansive, and of course because we rely on rain-fed agriculture quite a bit in Tanzania, you find that access to finance is very risky, because depending on the seasons, if you look at the last 2 seasons, beyond last season, 2-3 seasons ago, we had a problem with the prices of crops dropped. And once the prices of maize drops, it means that the use of input is very low in the next period, in the next season. So we had 2 really bad seasons that really affected input. Sorry, hello? So we had 2 bad seasons. Yes, we had 2 bad seasons, and so inputs dropped. So based on some of the statistics like that, you find that banks are very risk averse, and unless there's an intermediary providing a guarantee for the input companies or for the bank itself, like in Tanzania, we have the Past Trust that actually is a guarantee company that guarantees and enables AMCOs to actually access inputs. But without that, you find that the whole system, even the agro dealers, have a problem accessing finance. So that's one of the biggest gaps that we have found. But the second thing is access to finance for the new retail agro dealers. So how has this gap been filled actually in terms of finance? You find that the input companies, the hub agro dealers, are now giving trade credit to 30-day trade credit, 7-day credit to the agro dealers. So they're able to turn over their capital, working capital, and able to work with farmers. But you see, they really have to cycle. The cycle has to move very fast. So unfortunately, during the rainy period, the infrastructure, also the roads are bad. So if you're not able to get to aggregate your demand on time, you find that you end up not serving the farmers that you were supposed to serve. Farmers are not able to access inputs. And so the cycle is, because of low working capital and the fact that we have 7-day credit, we have 15-day credit, so that the repayment system is there, it becomes a problem. So that is one of the biggest gaps that is there. But the second gap we've seen in terms of SME is very difficult entry. There's very high cost of entry for the new agro dealers. If you want to start a business, there's a lot of, unlike other SMEs in Tanzania, where they work under the small business SIDO, which has an incubation program that actually gives them 3 years to be able to build up their working capital, to register, to become formalized, legalized, and to stabilize. So we find that the agro dealer system basically is reliant more so on the business savvy of the agro dealer, the support that the agro dealer is getting, the support that they're getting in terms of credit from the agro dealers, from the hub agro dealers, and they still have to take up the additional cost. Therefore, their profit margins are very low. So I think those are the two main gaps that I see in the agro dealer development in the input distribution chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine. So it's gradually coming out strongly that access to finance is an issue. I could see Andrew smiling. Andrew is an astute banker. He started from Barclays Bank in Ghana and with Fidelity Bank. He's now the head of banking sector for Aceli Africa. And he's also an agribusiness finance initiative. So Andrew, how can we get these things resolved? And let me put the question in good perspective. What is your perspective on the current agribusiness financing and credit mechanisms in Africa vis-a-vis the global health issues? How could this challenge be resolved? Are there regulatory and policy issues that need to be addressed by governments vis-a-vis what Josephine has actually alluded to? Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, Jane, and Fred. Yes, we all agree that access to finance is the elephant in the agri value chain, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And the recent happenings following COVID-19 seems to have exacerbated or worsened this situation. And the worst impacted area has been trade because of the closure of borders, then restriction of movement, which in itself impacted the availability of labor for additional farm hands, and you can list it on and on and on. Now, what this has contributed to is the cancellation of orders, as Jane alluded to, for example, in the vegetable subsector. So those involved in perishable goods or goods that are exported sort of had their orders cut down. What this meant is they were not ready, or they are not on top of their cash flow to be able to raise funds and meet repayments. So you have most of these clients asking for repayment holidays and so on and so forth. The good news is it has not been all dull and gloomy. with the support of the central banks all over Africa, banks have stepped up to the plate. So you find that most banks have supported their clients by restructuring or giving a loan repayment holiday, some of them up to 6 months, and in few selected cases, up to 12 months. Beyond that, the central banks have also encouraged banks, and there has been good response, where some of the banks have reduced their interest rates to as much as 2% on average across most of the countries where Agro operates. But that is just a COVID situation. Generally, the challenges facing agriculture, and for that matter, agri-finance and the credit mechanisms that are available in Africa are not ones that are conducive for inclusive agriculture. And you can put up a host of reasons as to why this is the case. One, as Josephine alluded to, there is lack of credit guarantees or risk mitigation facilities. And so the culminating effect of this is high interest rates, longer turnaround time for deal approvals, and generally you find that the support from government that comes to tends to be short-sighted or short-term in nature. Now that is the general view. But another interesting perspective which I will want to bring to fore is the realization that even the banks that lend to the agri-SMEs do not make as much profit as one will require or as will be desired. A research carried out by my organization, Untitled Africa, indicates that there is an average of a 5% drop in profitability for banks or financial institutions, especially in East Africa, that support agri-SMEs. This research also points to the fact that supporting the agri sector is 2 times as risky as compared to other sectors. So yes, as Madam Jane pointed out, as a result of this, banks have become completely risk averse and largely shy away from agri. But Dr. Entry, you alluded to the fact that agri is the heart of Africa. It contributes an average of 30% of GDP across Africa and employs between 50 to 60% of the active population. So yes, in spite of the challenges, we have to eat, we have to produce, and we have to survive. So there must be a way out. What can we do to ensure that we support the banks to do more than they are doing? And you will recall that just a couple of minutes ago, I mentioned the challenges due to profitability and the fact that agri is riskier as compared to other sectors. So ASTELI, as an institution, has developed some mechanisms, which I will come to shortly, as a way of supporting banks to be able to address and take on head on some of these challenges. It comes in 2 main forms, and these are all data-driven. One is a first loss cover, which is a financial incentive to support financial institutions in East Africa to be able to cover the 2% loss that I spoke about, the 5% drop in profitability that I spoke about earlier. Then we have beyond the first loss cover, we have an origination incentive, and then there is an impact bonus too. But let me step a bit beyond ASELI to speak generally about what I think should be done in the ecosystem beyond East Africa and Africa as a whole. One of the key challenges as a result of COVID-19 has been the increase in non-performing loans. And this has been because of cancellation of orders, restrictions, and so things are not moving as they will. And as we just heard a little while ago, in the case of Tanzania, they have reduced their acreage and they have reduced production generally. What can be done? One of the ways is what the central bank has done to support banks to reduce interest rates. But that is not all. Beyond the reduction of interest rates, I think the central banks have to encourage banks again to go beyond the 6 months repayment holidays, and probably I'll advocate for a complete whole year, say 12 months, to give proper reprieve to agri-SMEs to be able to take a breather. Now, one of the elephants in the conundrum of agricultural finance is high interest rates. So generally, everybody around the table will agree that yes, interest rates are high, especially in Africa. But the good news is government has the propensity or the capacity to be able to attract funding from development agencies and the UN agencies at concessionary rates. So one of my proposals would be for government to go ahead and take on some of these concessionary loans and pass it on to commercial banks with key guidelines and focused monitoring and control mechanisms so that these monies go to the subsectors that create impact for the economies. Maybe one more before I take a back step will be following a recent change in the banking rules. All central banks have adopted or introduced what we call the IFRS 9. And the IFRS 9 is a banking regulation that requires that banks set aside a portion of their capital towards the loans that they give. So as you go into giving out the loan, per the directives of the new banking guideline, you are supposed to set aside a portion of your capital in lieu of the fact that when that loan goes bad, there is enough to cushion you. You will recall that I mentioned that agri is 2 times riskier than other sectors. Now, what that means is the capital allocation for agriculture following the new directive requires that banks set aside a higher portion of their capital than other sectors. What does that mean? What it means is, as a bank, you will have to choose between whether you set aside more capital for agri, or you go to an area that does not require you to set aside that much of capital. And in my view, this is inimical to the growth of agriculture, especially inclusive agriculture, which is what Agro is focusing on. And so my proposition or proposal will be to have central governments and central banks sort of support commercial banks that have interest in agri to be able to cushion them with some soft capital, so that when it comes to setting aside the capital, the banks will not be too much challenged. And finally, capacity building is critical. So one of the ways that we can resolve some of these challenges is to have the central bank encourage commercial banks and indeed all financial institutions to have a dedicated agricultural lending desk. This must be supported by core staff and a well thought through strategy. I'm I am hopeful and confident that if these propositions are carried forward, and as we go around to another round of questioning, I'll be able to add more insight and meat to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that elaborate proposition on the financing sector. I'm sure Engineer Bello is looking at how he could talk with the Central Bank of Nigeria and other colleagues elsewhere in terms of how they could support agro input distribution systems in Nigeria and other parts of the world, of Africa, for that matter. So, Engineer Bello, you're welcome. And then from what Andy said, it created that impression that there are some challenges for input distributors, especially your unit. By the way, Engineer Bello, he is the director in charge of Farm Input Support Services of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Nigeria. He has huge load of expertise over the last 3 decades behind him. So he knows a lot about how the challenges that they go through in order to have access to finance. So, Engineer Bello, from the picture that Andrew has painted, what is the way around it for you to support leadership in Nigeria specifically, and how you could also relate to other African countries?
Thank you very much, Dr. Victor, and for that elaborate explanation by Mr. Andrew. In Nigeria, the agro section, the agro dealer section, we had huge of experiences. One of the things that we did in Nigeria was trying to develop this sector to ensure that this sector is self-sustaining. And in the recent time, it is such an organized sector because of the various support that we have gotten from different partners, especially Agro, in trying to ensure that this sector is sustained. But one of the major things that Mr. Andrew spoke about is financing, having access to loan to be able to service the farmers. If we look at it from the aspect of the farmers, one of the major things that the farmer is looking for is how do I get this product? How do I get input? What are the prices of this input? What is the quality of this input? And how will I be able to even purchase the input? So we look at this in Nigeria as a holistic, we approach it holistically as a major, looking at all the players in the sector and putting the agro dealer in the center of it, because the agro dealer is the one that is linking the suppliers to the farmers. And if the agro dealer is not well positioned to be able to reach out to the farmers will not be able to get the right input at the right price. So in Nigeria, one of the major things that the federal government did to address this issue over the years, we've gone through several stages of trying to refine the ways by which the agro dealers will operate and be able to reach out to farmers and be able to cover the large populace of farmers. You know, Nigeria is a very large country, and the farmers are spread all over the place. So one of the major things we first applied was e-wallet, which I'm sure is a lot of other countries have been able to take advantage of. Providing technology. E-wallet was able to organize the agro dealers using technology and being able to use them to service the farmers and being able to take very good record of the services they will need, so that we'll be able to build on whatever it allows us to be able to plan. Now, coming to the issue of price, especially in Nigeria, talking about loans to agro dealers and financing to agro dealers, you know that the demand of the farmers will determine the quantum of loan that the agro dealers will take. So what had been done in Nigeria is that the federal government have made some loans available, especially this COVID period, a loan of over 50 billion in Nigeria currency, available that small and medium scale small and medium scale entrepreneur can take advantage of. This loan is available to our agro dealers to be able to get input, to access input that can be made available to farmers. Also, the federal government is looking at the area of making arrangements to make a zero interest rate loan available to farmers in the form of input, so that the farmers will be able to get this input and be able to use it. Because during this COVID issue that came up, it became so apparent that farmers may not be able to, the COVID issue might be able to affect farmers because it was so clear. Farmers were not going to the farm, they were not having access to input. Even the little funds they had on them, they were beginning to spend. So the federal government swung into action. The first thing that the president did was to first speak to the major input, which is fertilizer in Nigeria, to first reduce the cost of fertilizer by subsidizing it, which was the first step taken by the government, that is talking about the pricing. And then secondly, making it accessible to them by making sure that the agro dealers, the blenders who are producing this fertilizer in Nigeria are provided with required raw materials to be able to provide enough quantity so that the price of the fertilizer, which is one of the major inputs, is not, inflation does not catch up, COVID effect does not catch up with it. Another thing that the government had done in the short time is to make sure that there is access to seed. Within the last few weeks, the federal government had distributed free seed to farmers to ensure that they are able to plant through the agro dealers. It is a system that is quite sustaining, so that the agro dealers are made relevant, and they are also allowed to be able to have direct impact and constant contact with the farmers. Talking about quality of the seed, quality of the product, both seed and fertilizer, the president had, because one of the major problems we have in Nigeria is having quality seed and having quality fertilizer. There are a lot of adulteration of fertilizer in Nigeria. So one of the major thing, the major thing that the president had done in Nigeria is to ensure that there is an act enacted to support the fertilizer regime, so that there won't be adulteration, and we are sure that the input being given to the farmers is right and is the right quality and in the right quantity. Let me address the issue of finance more squarely. We are trying to put together, facilitate the agro dealers to be self-sustaining. We had discovered from the presentation that was made earlier, we discovered, which is very true of Nigeria, we discovered that sustaining the agro dealers, especially when it is off-season, can be quite a bit of a problem. So what we had done is to organize them in such a way that they will be self-insuring. That is to say, within their organization, they can provide collateral for themselves based on their strength, and approach the bank based on the strength that they have. We are looking into that, and we are also speaking to the bank because Mr. Andrew made it so clear that the banks are finding it a bit difficult to give loans to agro dealers because of the risk factors that are involved, paying back of the loans and all the rest. We have looked all through into this, and we are speaking to the banks and putting the agro dealers together and looking for a way to ensure that they can have access to loan in such a way that it will be easy to pay back. Because in Nigeria, we have two major seasons, like we have the dry season and the wet season, and there's usually a break. And during that break, it's usually very difficult to pay, to have activities that will be able to generate funds to be able to pay back the loan. These are part of the things that we are doing in Nigeria as at today, and based on this COVID, this pandemic that is across the country. I need to put on record also that one of the problems that we have in reaching the farmers is the infrastructure. In Nigeria, there are a lot of infrastructure issues, and the government is taking this has made available some funds, and they are facing this squarely, talking to the rural roads, making sure that there is access to the rural, the interland, fixing the rural roads, making access to the farmers, making sure that input access for farmers to be able to get input will be a lot easier in the long run. Thank you. Maybe I'll stop here and allow further questions as we continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since you just spoke about free seed, among other things, bienvenue, Madame Coulibaly. Madame Coulibaly, can you hear us? Please unmute your speaker. Whilst waiting for Madame Coulibaly to unmute her speaker, let me invite Mr. Tembo. Tembo is a country rep for IFAP in Uganda. Tembo, with what Andy said about finance, which was buttressed by some of the remedies
okay.
that put up in
I think it's on.
Okay, Madam.
Voilà, it's okay. Allô? Bonjour.
You heard about the measures put in place by, in the case of Nigeria, giving free seeds to farmers, and then these seeds also have been going through agro dealers. So I believe that these seeds came from seed companies like yours in Nigeria. So could you please let us know what's going on in Mali vis-a-vis this COVID situation? How is your business going on? And you could also let us know the role that agro dealers have played in pushing your business up to this stage. For your information, Madame Coulibaly is the co-award winner of African Food Prize 2017. And she has been a member of IFAP board since 2018. I think we've lost Madame Coulibaly again. So, Tembo, if you could hear me. Tembo, could you please let us know some of the policy issues that IFAP has been pursuing in Uganda in order to revolutionize the agro dealership or agro input systems in Uganda? Wilfred Tembo.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Wilfred, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to address myself on 5 small issues. I will not dwell so much on the history of agro-dealer development, because what actually happened in Uganda is similar to what happened in other sub-Saharan African countries. However, my first focus is on the perspectives of the current input distribution system in Uganda. Our government recognizes input distribution to such a level that during the corona pandemic, agro input dealers were regarded as essential workers, and therefore their premises were never asked to close down. But despite that recognition, input distribution and the supply of agricultural inputs still suffered to what I would estimate as about 30% reduction, because there was a curfew regulation that was beginning at 7 p.m. every evening, and therefore most of the businesses had to close early enough to allow people to rush home. Alongside the curfew, there were generally the whole economy was shut down, and therefore even the farmers could not get enough income from other businesses to invest in the purchase of inputs. We realized that the buying of inputs reduced quite a lot. The banks and the suppliers that were used to advancing credit to the agro dealers were not forthcoming during the pandemic, and therefore that much reduced the availability of the agricultural inputs on the market. So the supply of seeds, of fertilizers, and any other form of farm inputs has really gone down. However, the country is really not suffering so much, because we still have a lot of multiplicity of food sources, especially root crops and our famous bananas. Number two, I will address myself to the areas of gaps and issues that still stifle the development and growth of input distribution in Uganda. We still have a situation of low adoption of the use of seeds and fertilizers, majorly because of limited product knowledge in the use and the application of these improved inputs. Secondly, and this has been mentioned earlier, we have lots and lots of fluctuations in the prices for outputs from the farms, and this doesn't augur well with the farmers that invest in the use of improved inputs, because it doesn't offer them good motivation to invest in inputs for the following season. Financing, just has already been mentioned, is a big problem. We don't have well-structured agricultural loans and credit. We still have financing associated with very high interest rates, with big and steep requirements for collateral, and that has a direct effect of affecting the size of the stocks that has to be stocked at these agro dealerships. Lastly on this, we have limited inspection, or basically implementation of the regulations to do with quality assurance and general inspection in the marketplace. And this has led to an uncontrolled rise in adulteration, in the levels of counterfeiting, but also unscrupulous dealers on the market. We are trying to work this round to come up with issues to do with co-regulation and also self-regulation mechanisms by organizing agro dealers and getting it to them that it works in their best interests to have quality inputs on the market.
Hello, Wilfred. Okay, thank you. very much, Wilfred, for that. I must say that you are listening to a webinar on the role of agro-input distribution systems in African agriculture transformation agenda, which is being sponsored by Agro and is sponsored by the other members of PIATA. That's Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, USAID, BMZ, Rockefeller Foundation, and DFID. Madam Coulibaly, you heard Alhaji Engineer Bello talking about supply of free seeds to farmers, and this during this global health crisis, and most of them went through agro dealers. Where you started from as a seed company, which are one of the successful seed companies in Mali, please let us know the role that agro dealers have played in the growth and development of Fasokaba, for that matter, and the seed industry in Mali. Madam Coulibaly, can you hear us?
Okay. Thank you, Victor. Good one. Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Microphone is not open. Huh? Hello? Hello?
I can hear you. Please
We
go
can
ahead.
hear you. We can hear you.
Hello?
Madam, go ahead. Parlez, s'il vous plaît.
Long time, madam. We are hearing you.
Parlez, s'il vous plaît. Unmute your microphone. Please unmute your microphone. There's a challenge there. So whilst waiting. Yes.
Mr. Victor, I'd like to quickly say something here that the agro dealer, that the agro dealers I was talking about are like their associations are functioning like agro dealers in Nigeria. There are some associations that are functioning like agro dealers. I mean, value chains that are functioning like agro dealers in Nigeria, which are recognized. It is through them, not because we are at the stage of re-registering registering agro dealers bodies as agro dealers in Nigeria in such a way. We have a registered one because with this new law that we have, which has been signed into an act that has been signed by the federal government, we are expected to, by the National Security Agency, we're expected to register these agro dealers so that we will know the movement of every fertilizer in the country and other inputs, because fertilizer in Nigeria is a security issue, especially the NPK, the one that has the content of the nitrogen, and there. So I need to make this clear.
We're talking about urea.
Do you understand me, please?
We're talking about urea.
Yes. Hello?
Please go ahead.
Yes. So this association, this distribution was through this association, but they are like agro dealers. So I need to make that clear so that it will be the other panelists will be able to understand me. Thank you.
So you're going through associations like Nosaida, Nowaida in Kaduna, Nosaida in Niger State, which Agra is actually working with. Thank you very much. Yes, Madam Coulibaly, can you hear us? Please go ahead. I think there's an IT challenge there. We might need to, if If you have any questions, please put them on the chat room to be read pretty soon to us, and then we get the panelists to respond. But before that, Fred, in your presentation, you talk about access to finance, which is an issue, but I know that there are other mechanisms of access that is being tried in other countries. Could you please let us know, especially the credit, surprise credit, among others, in Tanzania, Mozambique, and other countries? Fred, can you hear us?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you. I particularly alluded to credit guarantee funds. We are using credit guarantee funds in a number of countries, including those ones you mentioned, whereby we guarantee a hub agro dealer, and then the hub agro dealer can distribute inputs to a number of retailers on consignment basis. So those are the ones we are brokering. Of course, we also link up agro dealers to financial institutions directly, and we try to. One of the aspects in the training is to train agro dealers in financial management. So yeah, there are quite a number of agro dealers, especially the big ones, the hub agro dealers, who have got linkages with financial institutions, with commercial banks, and they can borrow directly. So those instances are there. So we look at direct financial borrowing, commercial borrowing, or consignment supplies in the chain, in the input distribution network. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much, Fred. So, Josephine, how are you also going around this with respect to what Andy said, with respect to the fact that most of these businesses that are financial institutions that are financing agribusiness, there's an average nosedive of about 5% of their profits, which is quite scary. What are you also doing in the area that you are supporting agro dealership or input distribution system?
Okay. Just very briefly. One of the consignment, the issue of consignment lending is actually one of the biggest things where input companies have come in. And I want to give an example of a big fertilizer company like Kiara, where they've developed hub agro dealers and supported them, where they give them credit, they also give them discounted loans. And then you find that they have actually stepped in to be able to provide lending. If I give you an example of just last season, if you look at the percentage of loans that farmers received in the programs that we are supporting with Agro and the partners, you find that only 25% were actually bank loans, and the rest, 75%, came from consignment lending. So the consignment lenders have actually stepped in. I believe it helps with farmers actually accessing with very little, because as interest rates are so high, you find that then when bank loans actually come in directly to small agro dealers, you find that the cost of inputs goes high. But when you actually access inputs, if the hub agro dealer is able to get a loan themselves, they're able, because they are working with so many farmers and they're working with so many agro dealers, the interest rates are actually spread out, and that's still, then the farmer doesn't feel the impact, and then they're able to provide consignment lending. So the input companies, the hub agro dealers, they've stepped up really well to be able to provide that. And if you look at the system for hub agro dealers, and I think we were talking with Fred, is you find hub agro dealers are actually supporting about 10 agro dealers. Not only are they doing direct business with farmer cooperatives, they're also working with about 10 agro dealers. If you put an average of 1,000, because we say 1,000, then you're making profit. For each small agro dealer, you find that you're actually working with 15,000 farmers through one hub agro dealer. So between 15,000 to 20,000 farmers, which is quite a big number. And that is the scale that Agro and its partners are looking at in terms of how do we reach scale in terms of the input distribution system. If you're working with 15,000 farmers along the distribution chain and you've sorted it out and you're able to work on the issues of bucket, the pull and the push, it actually brings it together. So consignment, there's also, as I say, Tanzania, we are very lucky. We do actually have a guarantee fund. Apart from the Agro guarantee, Agro is actually working with Past Trust. Agro and its partners are working with Past Trust and also providing a guarantee as well in the bank. And between those two collaborations, to be able to leverage the funds from Past Trust and the funds that are in the bank for the agro dealers, the system is working and more inputs are actually moving to the farmers.
Thank you very much. Let's try.
I just wanted to add.
Okay, go ahead, Justin.
Sorry. Okay, I just wanted to add something on the issue of COVID. For East Africa, we will know more, and I'm just reiterating what Tembo said. We will know more about the impact of the pandemic. We will know more about the impact of the pandemic as soon as the output market, the marketing that is currently going on finishes. We will know how much money farmers have because we are looking at cash flows. How much money will the farmer get in hand? So as we get into December, into March, I think we will be able to assess a bigger impact in terms of what is the impact of the pandemic on the input distribution system and agriculture across Africa. Thank you.
Let's try Madam Coulibaly for another time and see whether she could speak. Madam Coulibaly, can you hear us? Please go ahead. I think there's a technology issue there. Josephine, do you have some questions for the panelists that you can read out for them to respond to? Josephine?
Yes, Victor. There are many questions that have come in. We'll read first two and then continue depending on the amount of time that we have. The first question is from Kofi Henaku, and it is to Fred. Will Agro be willing to work with a private sector company to integrate this database of African agro input dealers into a farm network system to make it available to Africa? The other question is from Ezra, and he's asking, how can free seed be sustained in the long run? How do the farmers know their cost of production in that case? And perhaps I can add another one from McLeod. How do agro dealers manage competition from big input suppliers, distributors, who besides supplying operate chains of retail shops selling agro inputs?
Are they all directed to me, or I can answer?
I think two are for you, the data one and then the management of competition between hub dealers and then the retailers.
Again, Victor, the two questions for me?
The two questions. The one is for data. How could you integrate the data for Africa to support development? And then the third question, that was management of competition between hub dealers and then the retailers, because there are some places that the hub dealers or the input suppliers themselves are retailing, and that we have the retailers there. How are we going about it to manage those competition? And the other one goes to Engineer Bello. That's sustainability of the free seed. Please, Fred, go ahead.
If I can begin with the second one, I'm not sure I understand the first one, but the second one is actually a symptom of an inefficient distribution system. That's why we are emphasizing these strong business linkages. If a hub agro dealer, for instance, or an input supplier had an efficient network of retailers, there would be no need for him to drive around and bypass them. because it is obviously more expensive for a hub agro dealer or an input supplier to try and reach, let's say, 10 villages or 30 villages, whatever. There's a limit to how far they can go with their own delivery system. So because they have no choice, that's why they do that. But we believe that as we strengthen the linkages between these big suppliers and the rural retail network, both of agro dealers and VBAs, we believe this problem will be addressed. So I believe that's a symptom, and it can be addressed as we strengthen the network. I'm sorry I have to bother you, Victor, but I didn't understand the first question.
Josephine, could you read again the first question, please? The one on the data for Africa.
All right. Fred, will Agro be willing to work with the private sector company to integrate this database of African agro input dealers into a farm network system to make it available to Africa?
Oh yes, the database of agro dealers that we are creating is public. It's a public database. We are not creating it for ourselves. We are creating so that potential input suppliers can know the channels available for their businesses. We are creating it so that policymakers can know where the agro dealers are, and if they need to, to use them in reaching farmers, they can access them. So yes, the databases, we are creating them for all players in the agricultural sector, for that matter, and they are available to be shared with private sector. In fact, we want to make private sector own these databases. That's why we are working with them, even in helping us to expand the network in rural areas, so that they are part and parcel of these networks that are being created, and they can own them right from the word go. I hope that answers the question.
Very well, Fred. Engineer Bello, there's a question about sustainability of the free seed, whether it's because of the COVID time that you are doing that, or it's something that has been going on, and how sustainable it's going to be.
Okay, thank you. It's it is because of the COVID that is being done. Free seed have not been given to farmers before now. It's just because of the COVID effect. It's not a thing that will be continuous. We are all aware that the COVID affected our major source of income as a nation. So agriculture is being further strengthened to be another source of income. And so one of the easiest ways to encourage farmers is to ensure that they have enough input. And after subsidizing fertilizer, the government thought it wise that some level of releases of free seed could be given to farmers to some level. That is just for this COVID. It's not going to be something that will be continuous. It's not going to be it's not on a continuous basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Joseph, do you have another set of questions?
Oh yeah, there are many, Victor. The next one is from Ishmael Ochere. He says he would like to find out from the speakers how they are leveraging saving groups, particularly the VSLAs in agro input distribution. There are over 500,000 VSLAs in most of the African countries, and mostly are in rural areas.
Yes, next one.
Another question, savings groups, through largely informal, have been proved successful in most African countries. What is being done to channel COVID-2019 support in form of input credit, taking the management capacity of the groups into consideration to help them increase production this farming season? Under MIDA, a starter pack package under which seed and fertilizer was provided to farmers as input credit proved very successful. Can't we do something similar for savings group? That was from Kosi Ashong.
Okay, let's take this round of questions. I think most of them went to Andrew. Is Andrew still on? Andrew from Africa. Okay. Yes,
yeah.
You heard about 3 questions actually I'll come to you. Leveraging the VSLA programs in agribusiness financing. So you're talking about more of inclusive finance, and also how you could also use other means of supporting farmers financing. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. No, I think any support that makes the case of the smallholder farmer stronger is welcome to any commercial bank. So to the extent that the VSLAs are in group and contribute towards the equity contribution of any agro finance deal, the bank will welcome it. So I think what has to be done is generally most banks require for some equity contribution from their clients. And so these VSLA supports can come in as the equity contribution, and then the bank will top up with the required amount that is needed to get the agro input to the client.
Justin, I think you have something to contribute.
Yes, I wanted to add on something on the savings groups. As we are moving towards sustainability, we have areas where the agro dealers are actually, because of cash flow issues, of course, they're training their farmers to save for inputs. So we've found that a situation where small informal groups actually save for inputs and are able to access inputs, they are supported by the agro dealer in terms of capacity building, discussion on how much it is, how many acres they want to grow their maize, and then they save. And then they're able to actually buy inputs at the end, because they do actually do, they're able to sell a chicken here, they're able to do some work in some farm throughout the season. And then they're able to actually put that together. So that is something that we have seen towards sustainability, where we are stepping away as a non-profit organization. We are stepping away and seeing how the system is working on its own. And this is an initiative that Agro and its partners have been able to teach the agro dealers, that they need to be more involved in their systems to be able to generate business. So if it's cash business. The second one that is also happening is the 50% deposits that farmers actually save and deposit 50%, and they get 50% of consignment. But the other one, as Andrew said, is the bank. They save 20%. The bank puts in, they're able to save the 20% along the season, put it in as deposit, and then the bank tops up. So those are the 3 systems that are being used along in Tanzania, and I think they can be scaled out to other places, to other countries, to enable access to inputs for smallholder farmers. Thank you.
I agree with you. This is a very good financial product that could be reviewed and then upscale in other areas so as to facilitate inclusive financing to some of these farmers, because access to finance is crucial. As Andy was saying, it's quite scary, but I believe that there are ways of going around that if you're able to support risk mitigation systems, mechanisms, such as NESAL in Nigeria, we have GESAL in Ghana, and there are other insurance or risk mitigating ones that we could do, such as even the agricultural insurance, so that to give the requisite comfort to the financial institution to do that. And also, as Andy was saying, there's a need for us to make sure that we get these financial institutions to have agribusiness desks and have dedicated staff whose capacity will be built. You know, sometimes it's a matter of understanding. Let's say I want to plant in July and give me the money in September. I mean, there's that propensity of diversing the funds, and then you end up burning your fingers. So I think this understanding the dynamics of financing agri inputs and also supporting the farmers at the right time for funds so that they can buy or patronize some of these inputs will go a long way to do that. But before I come back to you to wrap up, we want Josephine to give us the last batch of questions, and then I'll come back to you for you to give us your closing remarks. So, Josephine, do you have the last set of questions, please?
Yeah, thank you, Victor. The next one is from Shepo Maeko. I think it's related to an earlier one. Shouldn't competition to the agro dealers be seen as a necessary element to ensure that farmers get the best services and offerings from their investment dollars spent on inputs?
Yes, next.
The next one would be, in the era of COVID-19, where there are restrictions on movement of goods and services, how do we ensure the distribution / access to input to meet the seasonal activities of farmers? That's a question by Dominic Answer.
That question again, please repeat that question.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Now, can I?
Hello?
About Mali?
Hello?
About
Mali?
Okay, madam, go ahead.
Okay, about Mali, I think everything has been said already. It's the same problem everywhere. It's the same problem everywhere in Africa. What I'm going to say, COVID, we cannot see the impact of COVID yet until the end of this campaign. What we are doing in Mali here, we have an agro dealer network. But what is the problem is access to financial. They don't have a working capital. And we put seed to them, we give seed to them, so they have to pay back. Even advance, they cannot pay, like to pay half 50% and pay the rest at the end of the campaign. They cannot afford. They are so poor. I think something needs to be done, maybe at the government side or the partner as Agro, because this agro dealers network was very working when it was time to CNFA. So when CNFA was here, Agro put a guarantee fund to microfinance, because the banking services cannot take agro dealers. The amounts are very small, and there is I think they can work only with microfinance. They can work only with microfinance. So if the old system can come back, like putting guaranteed fund to the microfinances, we are working with the 3 big microfinance. That will be good. The only problem with agro dealers is that they don't have a fund. They don't have a fund to pay cash, and their loan rate is very low. It's very low. So what is good? What's good is to pay cash, so everybody can move. To do that, I think agro dealer need to easy access financial. About the government side, the government some law may be made to strengthen it. All the actors, we are doing the same thing. If there is a market for a seed, you will find everybody on bidding to get the market. We are seed company. We get loan to buy equipment to hire workers, and we subcontract seed growers. If we cannot sell the seed, we cannot pay back all those things. Agro dealers, the common problem of agro dealers all over in Africa is working farm. If something needs to be done on that side, that's what I can say. Everything has been saying. Otherwise, we have a consortium, Agro consortium. There we have a good system. We are transforming VBAs to agro dealers. The number is not the problem. The problem is the working capital. How much they are going to sell cash, or they are going to take on loan and paying back seed companies. That's the issue. I think VFS, if we can come back with the system of CNFA to put guarantee fund in the microfinance, so
Okay, thank you very much,
agro
Madam
dealer,
Kulibali.
they can have a loan and pay cash our seed, and that will be the best.
Okay, so I believe we all. Okay, thank you very much, Madam Kulibali. Merci beaucoup. Yes, it's more on she is actually doing 50%. I'm sure it was breaking, but the agro dealers are doing 50% deposits, and then they pay at the end of the season. So it's a way of giving them some supplies credit and giving them the comfort. It's more of being able to double up, because if you are doing 50% and then you pay the rest at the end of it, so it means that your working capital have been doubled, so to speak. Supplies credits, as Fred alluded to, is what Agra is supporting some of these input suppliers, so that seed company like Kostasokaba that they are doing in Mali, and also the fact that if we can have guarantee fund with some of these market institutions, which in some places we used to, it's something that we can also revisit for sustainability. Let's make sure that there's a fund, which maybe Alaji Engineer Bello, I'm wondering how you could work closely with NESA so that we can also have a fund for MFIs in terms of guarantee, even though there are some challenges in that failing into the NESA, but how you can make it flexible for a lot of agro dealers, and by so doing, by extension, the farmers could have access to, because these things could support access to finance, and then it could also enhance productivity, because when they are able to access the technology, then it means that they can have the requisite leverage in terms of productivity, and then also increasing yield as well as income for these farmers. So there was a question that I was interested in from Dominic Ansa that I wanted Josephine to repeat, because it's something that I want Andrew to respond to. So while Josephine, if you have that one before they wrap up for the end of the webinar.
All right. In the era of COVID-19, where there are restrictions on the movement of goods and services, how do we ensure the distribution stroke access to input to meet the seasonal activities of farmers?
Okay. So, Engineer Bello, I think this question also comes to you as somebody from policy end.
Okay. Thank you very much, Victor. In Nigeria, what the government did was that at the onset of COVID, the government first ensured that there is free movement of both foodstuffs and inputs across the country, major commodity, foodstuffs, agricultural input across the country. So there's no restriction to that. In fact, the Federal Ministry of Agri set up a task force in collaboration with the security system of security services of the country, headed by in each of the states, the team is headed by the Commissioner of Police to make sure that they go to the roads and ensure that there's a free movement of inputs across the states and within the states. This task force makes sure that all farmers are able to access the input. Also, the government made farmers one of the essential services. They allowed farmers to have access to their farms unrestricted so that they will be able to carry out their farming season. It is very obvious that there can never be crowding on the farm. So the government ensured that the farmers can have access to input and also be able to go to the farm to be able to carry out the farm so that there will be no disruption after COVID is over. That is from the policy side, that those are the steps taken in Nigeria. And I would like to also say further that to speak further on this issue of financing, please allow me to speak on this issue of financing. I discovered that this fragmented nature of this farming issue, fragmented nature of the farms of these our farmers made it quite difficult to be able to solve some of this problem. And I believe that we need to look more into the area of technology, using technology to be able to resolve a lot of this problem. We are trying to do something here in Nigeria where it's just an idea we're beginning to look at to ensure that we use technology to be able to make agro dealers very accessible to the farmers, because a lot of farmers don't even know how to get their input, and because they don't know how to get their input, because the farmer can have like 3 fields and he wants to he can move his input close to his farm. So we are trying to look at it holistically and use technology to solve some of this problem. I think it's an area that we need to really look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Andy, as you wrap up, how could you, as ASLI and then other financial institutions, support development of some of these establishment of such funds, so as to support MFIs to extend credit to agro dealers and for that matter, by extension, to farmers?
Thank you, Victor. So when I started my earlier discussion, I mentioned some of the findings of the ASLI research, which speaks to the fact that it is twice riskier lending to the ag sector. And even those who brave it out and support the agri-SME, what we call the missing middle, do suffer a lack of 5% profitability. In order to iron out that, or to smoothen the playing field for everybody, the ASLI approach was introduced, or the ASLI initiative was birthed. And as I mentioned earlier, this is data driven. And so everything that is done at ASLI is based on research. Some of the interventions we have introduced are twofold. One is the financial incentive, and the other is a technical assistance. You did mention that some of the challenges around agricultural finance is just having the know-how. So with our technical assistance facility, we are supporting SMEs to become bank ready so that banks are able to support them and support them well. This technical assistance for SMEs is threefold. So we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, depending on the complexity and the revenue generation capacity of that agri-SME. We also provide technical assistance to the banks themselves. And you are aware what I benefited from your former organization, USA FinGap, in terms of capacity building. And I think this is critical for anybody who wants to progress in agricultural finance. In terms of financial incentives, we offer credit guarantees to commercial banks. And this is in a form of first loss cover. You recall I mentioned the 5% dip in profitability. So the Sterling initiative is to correct these equations, and we provide the first loss cover in the region of between 2 to 8% to be able to support banks that are involved in the agri-SMEs, i.e. between 25,000 to 1.5 million range. And there is a model that we use to determine who qualifies for what and what amount you qualify for. Beyond the first loss cover, we also appreciate and know that in supporting agricultural SMEs, banks incur costs, and these costs contribute to part of the dip in their profitability. So one of our tools is the origination incentive. So clients and the financial institutions that we work with earn an origination incentive as a result of lending to agri-SMEs in East Africa. All this is aimed at increasing the risk appetite of the banks so that they can now double up, give out more to the financial institutions than they are currently doing. Beyond what ASELI is doing, I think other institutions like AGRA and African Development Bank also have the incentive-based risk-sharing mechanism. And you alluded to GESAL and NESAL. So my recommendation would be more of this should move around the continent so as to cushion the banks so that they are able to do more than they are currently doing. Because yes, banks are risk averse, but any risk mitigating tool or any risk sharing mechanism that comes to cushion the risk of the banks will be welcomed. I think finally, I think a body like Ifrs, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, has set up a private sector and this is a welcome news. We expect that this will now support banks and other investors to be able to do more. However, IFAD must also have look at, in order to reach out to smallholder farmers, reconsider its concept around elite capture. It is a fact that commercial banks, especially in Africa, do not have the capacity to lend directly to smallholder farmers. So the only way they can go through smallholder farmers is either through an aggregator, an off-taker, a nucleus farmer, or agencies such as something in those regions. And so if we say because of elite capture, we will not support this kind of approach, then it throws back, or it sort of reverses everything that has been done, because banks are risk, but then they need support to be able to move further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for also bringing in the USAID financing Ghana Agriculture Project, USAID FinGap, which was actually gave a results that is reversed to it, because most of the financial institutions that participated, the agribusiness loan component, they were making more profits in terms of the delinquency rate was quite low, unlike the other side whereby they were burning their fingers. So I think it's more of the training which the USAID FinGap model supported, which was done by Palladium Group in Ghana and is being implemented in other countries, which also facilitated that and supported a lot of input distributors. I think the USAID FinGap was doing 45 to 48% of input distribution as part of the $168 million that it facilitated, which you did well as Barclays linchpin on that. So I believe that there's a way for us to help agro-dealer development in Africa. Josephine, as you wrap up, how are you going around your business with respect to ICT to be at the center of it so that we could upscale? In about 1 minute or 2 minutes, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. It's 1 minute. Initially, we started a system where agro dealers, because of loss of inventory, we were doing inventory management for using ICT for agro dealers. And agro dealers have started using the system and they're able to generate their records. But as we go forward, you realize that extension has to be different. We've got to reach a point where we are now, I mean, the mobile phone companies are now overwhelmed, as you can see. The network is not so good. We have, as in agriculture, we need to start engaging with the mobile operators. Is the infrastructure ready to carry out extension? Are people ready? Are their mindsets ready to actually learn not by seeing physically, but actually learning online. So I think it's basically, we now need to reach a point where the systems we are looking at is we have to get best practice. There are so many players out there doing digitization, but how efficient is it? Are we being able to do transactions? Because the whole point of all this is what Fred said, profits at the end of it. Everybody must make money from the system. The farmer must make money, and the system must be easy enough for people to understand. So as we go forward, I think there's something we need to think about. I'd like to share my screen for a minute. I'd like to share the presentation, or maybe just remind everybody Fred's drawing of the hub agro dealer. If we do not invest in digitizing the system, getting ICT into that system, we will not reach scale. It's going to reach a point where the hub agro dealer is not going to be able to manage the 15,000 farmers. The system will expand beyond the 15,000 farmers. So how do we manage it? The transactions will be bigger. The mobile systems, the radio, the TV that we're going to use, the costs must go down. We must be able to sit down and negotiate with TV for hub agro dealer to be able to do a TV program of extension, not the NGOs. And then the NGOs need to reach a point where they step back in terms of ICT. We cannot be running the systems ourselves. The systems must be commercially viable. So we're talking about ICT systems that are not NGO run. We are market facilitators creating those linkages. And so that is what I think about where we need to go in terms of ICT, in terms of extension, and in terms of growing this system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I come back to Fred to wrap up, let me mention that this webinar is sponsored by AGRA, Alliance for Green Evolution in Africa, and is supported by other Piata members, BMZ, Rockefeller Foundation, BMGF, USAID, and DFID. Now, Fred, over to you to do the final wrap up so that we could hand over. Fred, please.
Thank you, Victor. Just in a few words, the overall aim, vision for Agro is to transform African agriculture. And to be able to do that, Agro looks at itself as a catalyzer. We just catalyze the process, and the other partners and value chain actors take over. So as far as the input distribution system is concerned, our input right from the beginning was to create these networks. Yeah, initially, actually, we started these networks from zero. They were not there at all. So we created these networks of micro, small, and medium enterprises dealing in agriculture inputs and technologies. Now we have reached a point, as I said in my presentation, where we expect the system to be self-propelling. As Josephine pointed out, the NGOs will pull back. Agro is a big NGO. So we are also looking at ourselves as pulling back and looking to a situation where the input suppliers, the seed companies, the fertilizer companies are stepping in to continue to build and strengthen the input distribution networks, to link up with what we have started and continue to expand it. Of course, on the basis that these companies will make money, will make profits. We are looking at governments to continue in their role as supervisors, as it were, as regulatory mechanisms to make sure that everybody is doing their work according to the law. So the governments will always remain there. They are not like NGOs like ourselves who will pull out. They remain as key actors in the network, in the system, in the struggle to transform African agriculture by ensuring that everybody plays by the rules. And then we will be happy to sit back and see an input distribution that is self-propelling, You have got input companies pushing their inputs, improved inputs, good seed, good fertilizers. And we see a network of distributors comprising of hub agro dealers, retail agro dealers, and VBAs taking these inputs and getting them to the farmers. And we are also seeing farmers who are sensitized, who know the value of improved inputs and are able to invest themselves by putting together some funds and buying the inputs so that there is some money in the system. But for farmers to be able to do that, Agro and other partners are looking at commodity markets, output markets. We are looking at functioning output markets so that whatever the farmer produces can be bought at a reasonable price to incentivize the farmer to be able to go back and buy inputs the next season. So this is the transformed systemic agricultural input distribution that we are looking at and we hope to achieve in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. From all these discussions, it comes out strongly that significant progress has been made in making agro inputs readily available to farmers in their localities through agro dealers who access seed, fertilizer, agrochemicals, and farm machinery from suppliers at wholesale prices and retail them to farmers. In so doing, they have reduced distances that farmers travel to do that, especially in the agri-focused geographies, and also where other partners are also implementing projects to reduce them from over 20 kilometers to less than 10 kilometers. So there's a need for us to upscale. So it's a further priority also as Agri to facilitate startup matching grants and other credit mechanisms that came out strongly to enable the agro dealers expand their distribution network and enhance portfolio diversification to facilitate resilience in agribusiness activities. Therefore, Agri will seek to upscale these roles by agro dealers with mechanism to attract more female into the industry, because we believe that there's a need for us to also support a lot of women to also join the fray. This will enhance smallholder farmers' access to these products and services by increasing the agro dealer densities in the priority countries and other African countries as well, so as to expand new frontiers on the continent. It is essential to continue to expand the network of agro dealers, improve efficiency and service delivery to strengthen the sustainability of their businesses. This will require partnership with the private sector, including those in financial sector, fertilizer and seed producers, as well as public regulatory institutions. So with this, I would like to say thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. We are very grateful. We must say that without you, there wouldn't have been any COVID, any webinar for us to also let you know that there are some issues that have been addressed. If there are some questions that have not been addressed, we'll try as much as possible to make sure that you have that. And we are grateful for also posting your questions, and that has also have also enlightened the discussions. Thank you very much. So we come your way again with another webinar. We say thank you very much and merci beaucoup. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.